All right, here we go. Part two of the whaler's return. Just after 8, they left the church and started off on the path to her home. They had walked only a short distance when Sylvester heard the brush crackle ahead of them, and out stepped James Myers. Okay, his name's James. Okay, not Michael. Blocking their way, Sylvester felt his face flushed with anger. "You're a bad loser, aren't you, Myers?" "Hush," said Virginia. "What do you mean by following me like this, James? You want this greasy whaler to walk you home?" Sylvester moved towards him threateningly, but Virginia put a restraining hand on his arm. "He bought my box supper, and he has the right to walk me home. Let us by, please." Myers looked furious, but he stepped to one side. From that day on, Sylvester and Virginia often walked the island together. He marveled at the strangely beautiful skeletons of trees, killed by the advancing sand and spray, still standing in eerie ghost forest on the ocean side, while the forest continued to advance on the growing side of the island. The dunes at Shackleford were the largest on the eastern coast. The young people played upon them like two children, hiding, climbing, tumbling down into the soft sand below, and sometimes embracing. Together they watched the antics of the loons, the cormorants, the swans, and the sea ducks. Occasionally an Arctic unk would wheel above them, and when it did, Sylvester said nothing. But his heart lurched at the sight of that bird so familiar, and his thoughts turned toward the great whales of the Arctic. The days passed swiftly. Whether he was in love or not, Sylvester scarcely knew. The younger woman in the life of this tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed whaler, still more boy than man at 20, had been few. To him, the most important she had always been a ship or the ship. Finally, in late January, he watched the mizzen mast being towed in behind a boat from Florida. As John Chadwick had predicted, it had taken time. A 90-foot tall straight pine had to be located at a shipbuilding company, and they hauled up the coast. Even in an area with tall trees, it had been a long search to find the right one. Meanwhile, bad weather had set in at Cape Lookout. Sylvester and the crewmen were restless, and the New England owners of the ship fretted about the money they were losing each day during the long wait. When the mizzen mast was finally pulled into the bight, it needed to be latched to the dock until it was time to raise her. Meanwhile, the captain was signing on new crewmen to replace those injured or drowned in the storm, those who had wandered off, and the one who had married and swore he would go to sea no more. The captain swore too, saying he would use muscle if necessary to get everyone back aboard, and his threat was all that held in line some of the more timid seamen who had not forgotten the Thanksgiving storm. Just find other crewmen. I mean, you don't have to get people that were scared to come back. Well, good Lord. Crewmen and islanders watched the lifting of the 4-ton mast. A tripod was used to attach and unattach the line as needed, while the piece was guided, and precision and skill were essential, for there was always the danger that the mast would crash on the men. Ropes were adjusted, and the immense tree trunk was rising slowly in the air, while anti-sized men on the beach below stood ready to guide the piece in. Suddenly, a rope snapped, the tree swayed and leaned abruptly as though it would topple, but the other ropes held. Everyone sighed with relief. While Sylvester continued to watch tensely, the broken rope was replaced and work was over for the day. Tomorrow, the small 1-ton mizzen topmast would go up, and then the vessel would be ready. But morning brought rain and wind from the southeast, and for several days there was no let up in the weather. By the time the southeasterner had passed, two of the most experienced shipwrecks had disappeared, and there was more delay, much to the impatience of the New England ship owners. Sylvester was no longer in a great hurry. Not only was he seeing Virginia often, but here there was a season, and the sea determined that season. He was warmed by the sun, delayed by the wind, slowed by heavy fog, and he had come to accept this postponement calmly. When he returned one day from watching the slow progress on the ship, he found John Chadwick absorbed in the sharpening of his whaling lance. It was a 3-foot steel shaft on an 8-foot pole, and Sylvester sat looking on. He desperately wanted to go, for he loved the excitement of whaling. That is a big harpoon-looking pole right there, but I don't see no excitement in whaling. I'm sorry, but anyway. Surely his friend would ask him. Chadwick continued working on his lance for most of the afternoon, but seemed little inclined to talk. Now and then he would examine the point, give a slight, simple smile of satisfaction as he touched it, and then continue his sharpening. "Going whaling, eh?" Sylvester finally asked. Near Little River. We'll set up a crow's nest on one of the sandhills between there and the Cape. I guess those going be the Lewises, the Guthries, and Moores. If you're getting round to asking, will there be a space for another man? There will, broke in John. Come on, we'll get you a lance. But I need a harpoon, said Sylvester boldly. Chadwick gave him a quizzled look, but did not reply. It'd take a special kind of man, brawny, with a keen eye, unerring aim, and the boldness to throw his harpoon. The split second the whale was in the right position. When they reached the beach, 3 6-man crews were being made up. Chadwick joined 4 men, and Pond made the 6th, as if it were meant to be. He was given a lance from the equipment house, but Chadwick did not give him a harpoon. If a whale was sighted, the men would leap into their boat, and the whale belonged to the crew that reached it first. They always went in at least 2 boats, so that if one was overturned, the other could help. While the men waited, they talked of previous years and whales they had caught, calling each whale by a name that had given it. There was the Mayflower and Tom Rose's whale and Captain Jody's, and never recall how one of their number had drowned or how hard a whale had fought. Despite the relaxed talk, there was an underlying tension. Fishermen had reported signs that meant whales were nearby. They had seen bits of floating cuttlefish indicating whales high in the water feeding at the surfaces. For the first time, Sylvester would be chasing the right whale, an animal which inhabited waters close to island clusters. He recalled a warning he had often heard: beware of the sperm jaws. I don't know why they call them a sperm whale, but anyway, and the right whale's flukes. Both had proved deadly for many a whaler. He longed for his own harpoon, but all he had been given was a lance. So he began to rehearse in his mind what he would do. Standing in the bow of the pilot boat, the harpooner would wait until he was in the most favorable position to strike. The first harpoon must be followed by the second almost immediately, and the instant when the crew thought the whale would surface, they would haul the line in hard and come up right beside the whale. Then it would be up to him to strike swiftly with his long, sharp leaded lance piercing the whale's most vital spot, and then withdrawing the lance. If he were fortunate, he might slay the Leviathan with a single blow. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud cry from the lookout on the dunes. "There she blows!" I always thought that was funny. I'm sorry when they say that. And out at sea, he saw the characteristic spout of the right whale. It was a double V-shaped blast of misty white water ascending 15 feet in the air from the creature's two nostrils. There again came the excited shout of the lookout as the crews were jumping into the boats. Chadwick mained the foremost oar, his harpoon at his side. The harpoon was attached to an extremely strong tarred hemp line. They shoved off just behind the other boat, surrounded by the salt spray from the breakers and the smell of the sea. If the whale had been frightened by the sound of the shouts from the beach, Sylvester knew he might die for as long as 20 minutes, but the animal did not do so. Out among the waves, Sylvester saw the double white plumes of the V-shaped blow rise high above the water. All was quiet. The men made no sound. As whales have acute hearing, they were less than half a mile from their prey. Now and they paddled the boats fiercely in the direction of the twin spouts. Then they sighted other puffs of vapor, smoke like wisp, hovering over the gray water. And beneath the wisp, the surface of the water churned and shifted. It was toward the spot of turbulent air and water that the two small boats headed, buoyant and graceful, leaping from billow to billow. "Pull, boys, pull!" exhorted Chadwick in a voice so low it was only a whisper above the sounds of the sea. The boats hurtled on toward their prey. Sylvester's heart pounded. Vapor had now become jets and seemed to be all around them. There were two whales, not one. Sylvester saw the harpooner in the boat ahead of him. Stand up, and after an interminable moment, he watched a long black dart fly through the air toward the shoulder of one of the whales. The harpooner's boat rose into the air, and to Sylvester Pond's horror, the whale rose with it, and two gushes of vapor shot up. Men and oars flew in every direction into the water. Then the small craft fell back in the trough of a wave. Though partially filled with water, it was still almost, and the men began to scramble back into it. The harpooner had only grazed the whale, and the whale had surfaced briefly before making a deep dive. Sylvester turned to see the other whale beside the boat. He shared with Chadwick. Chadwick was waiting until the instant came when he was in the most favorable position to strike. Now it came. Hurling the harpoon, he fastened the solid in the whale's flesh, and their boat took off like a streak. I don't want to be in that position, be like on the boat, and then it takes off on you. Be like, hold on to something. Its bow soared above the water, leaped across the waves as the animal raced on, pulling the boat after him. Chadwick turned and signaled Sylvester to change places. Sylvester was filled with excitement. He was to deliver the mortal blow with his lance as soon as they could draw close enough to the whale. He positioned himself. It will be dead whale or stove boat, he thought as their small craft began to gain on the giant of the sea. It had to be a dead whale. It would see to it. Now, it was wood and black skin. The whale was touching their boat. Sylvester raised his arm, and with all of his strength, he plunged his lance into the dark mass beside the boat. A tremendous shuddering impact went through his body, and quickly, with a hard upward tug, he managed to withdraw the lance. Soon they were surrounded by a crimson sea, and Sylvester felt shaken by the whole experience. The whale appeared to be dying, but soon the animal sped off again, and once more the captors as the whale towed them at breakneck speed, lashing the waves with his great tail. They rode through the midst of a cloud of spray until gradually the boat slowed. At last death had arrived, and the Leviathan was still. Like I said, if I get on one of those type of boats and I got, start to be pulled by a whale or a shark or something, be like one of them carnivore rides that go whoop like that, I'll be scared to death too. But anyway, with the help of the other boat, they towed the whale to shore. Sylvester's arm tugged at his oar. He still felt the tension that would ebb from his mind and body slowly, the excitement of the chase and a second-by-second matching of wits with the whale. He wished he could care more about the money than would come later. But even while he was absorbed in the necessary cutting in and trying out, which produced the valuable clear barrels of oil, he was reliving the chase. Old men gathered around the crewmen as they worked, telling their own tales of whales that once had been. Did he want to sign on a whaling ship? Sylvester knew a year or more was not an unusual length of time for a whaler to be away from his home port. But sometimes it was twice that long. He thought of Virginia Davis. The Charles Sprang was almost ready to sail. It awaited the positioning of the missing topmast, which must be expertly handled, as it was fitted in the hounds, the hole in the large wooden collar atop the mizzenmast. The collar would hold the heavy topmast firmly in the place. Two men stood on the collar, and as everyone watched, they began to guide the tall topmast into the hound's depth. Could be the result if they should miss. On the ground, another two men carefully held the great ropes, waiting for signals from above. I think I'm going to make this into a three-parter, so here's part 3.